Welcome to the session on Mapping Ocean Finance for a New Decade, Sustainable Blue Economy Finance. My name is Dennis Fitch, and I lead the Sustainable Blue Economy workstream at UNEP. Today, we want to speak about the ocean and why its health is crucial for financial institutions and society. We have a set of brilliant speakers for you to discuss this topic, who I want to welcome warmly to today's panel. Speaking about their work as it relates to the sustainable blue economy today are Lucy Holmes, Senior Program Manager, Seafood Finance at WWF, Dr. Melissa Walsh, Program Manager for the Ocean Finance Initiative at the Asian Development Bank, Francis Chen, Senior Manager at China Industrial Bank, and Mitsuno Inada from Tokyo Marine Holdings. To briefly set the scene, the ocean is the largest ecosystem on Earth. It covers over 70% of our planet and is home to 80% of all life. But not only that, the ocean regulates the global climate, acts as the largest natural carbon sink, and produces around half the oxygen we breathe. Seafood and other marine organisms provide a primary source of protein for almost 3 billion people, and coral reefs and mangrove forests act as natural barriers protecting coastal communities from storms and floods. All these goods, services, and economic activities we derive from the ocean are estimated to be equivalent to the world's 7th largest economy in GDP terms. And this global economic output is reliant on a healthy ocean. Unfortunately, human activities have already severely altered 2/3 of the marine environment, leading to a triple crisis concerning the climate, biodiversity, and nature loss, as well as pollution and waste. In addition to being serious threats to nature and society, these crises also lead to economic losses which are often not considered. These topics are very relevant right now for the activities of banks, insurers, and investors. One just has to look at the front pages of news outlets globally over the last few months. Be it an oil spill off the pristine coast of Mauritius, a large-scale explosion in a port in Beirut, or a public outcry over illegal fishing fleets. Mismanaged marine industries and economic activities with a negative impact on the ocean are receiving ever more coverage and climb up the agenda of governments, financial institutions, and society as a whole. It becomes clear that business as usual is no longer an option. The sustainable blue economy acts as a vision for any ocean-linked sector. There are traditional ocean-linked industries which are not very sustainable in their current state and which need financing to transition wherever possible. There are others which are already on the right track, however, they require support to scale sustainable business models. But this is not only an environmental challenge, it is also an economic opportunity. And by building sustainable blue finance practices into their decision-making processes, and by engaging with their clients on these issues, financial institutions have a unique opportunity to steer ocean industries towards sustainability. Building resilience and long-term stability into marine industries means that financial players reduce risks of default and claims, ensuring their financial activities provide long-term viability and profitability. This is why the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative at UNEP is working with banks, insurers, and investors to mainstream sustainable finance practices supporting ocean health across the global finance industry. Crucially, we support the implementation of the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles, which aim to direct the flow of capital towards activities which directly contribute to SDG 14, Life Below Water. They are the world's first global guiding framework to finance a sustainable blue economy and crucially are aligned with existing principles and frameworks such as the PRB, PRI, and PSI, putting them into practice in an ocean context. Building on the momentum of these principles, and together with our more than 60 members, we have just released a first-of-its-kind practical toolkit to consider finance for the sustainable blue economy. It helps financial decision makers discover how to avoid and mitigate environmental and social risks and impacts, as well as how to make the most of opportunities across 5 key ocean-linked sectors. This guidance provides a detailed breakdown of which activities to seek out as best practices, which client activities to challenge, and which activities to avoid financing completely due to their damaging nature. For more information, you can find the link to download the guidance below the screen. Before we move on to the panel discussion, I want to give the floor to the representative from Tokyo Marine Holdings for a brief introductory message.
東京海上日動の稲田光野です。この度は UNEP-FI アジア太平洋地域ラウンドテーブルに参加する機会をいただき、感謝申し上げます。 新型コロナ感染症やその他さまざまな災害により困難な状況にある皆様に心よりお見舞い申し上げます。またこのような状況の中、本バーチャルラウンドテーブルにご参加いただきありがとうございました。当社は1879年に海上保険会社として創業して以来、保険を通じて社会経済の発展を支え続け、近年では洋上風力発電を支援する保険提供にも力を入れています。本日は持続可能なブルーエコノミーのビジネスケースとして地球の未来にかける保険として取り組んでいるグリーンギフトプロジェクトおよびマングローブ植林事業についてご説明します。社員の声をもとに1999年に創業120周年事業として開始したマングローブ植林事業は、10年後の2009年にはお客様と一緒に環境保護活動を行うことをコンセプトとしたお客様参画型 NGO 連携型グリーンギフトプロジェクトとして取り組みを充実し、気候変動の緩和や適応、防災・減災、生物多様性、湿地の保全などさまざまな価値創造を生み出すことで SDGs の達成に貢献しています。グリーンギフトプロジェクトは当社がお客様にお送りしている保険証券や保険約款のペーパーレス化にご賛同いただき、ウェブ約款などをお選びいただいた場合、紙資源の使用量削減額の一部を東南アジアを中心とした海外でのマングローブ植林事業や日本での環境保護活動グリーンギフト地球元気プログラムに投資し、市民社会組織や地域社会の皆様と共に価値競争を行うというものです。1999年度から2019年度までの21年間に植林した累計植林面積は11,240ヘクタール、米国ニューヨーク市セントラルパークの33個分ほどに達しました。マングローブが2019年度に吸収・固定した CO2 は13万トンに達し、東京海上グループの事業活動に伴う CO2 排出量についてカーボンニュートラルを2013年度から7年連続で達成しています。また、第三者機関である三菱総合研究所に委託して調査した結果、1999年度から2018年度までの20年間のマングローブ植林は累計125万トンの CO2 を固定し、1185億円の経済価値を生み出し、約141万人の人々に影響を与えています。そしてマングローブに関連し、14万人の漁業関連従事者が生計を立て、194万人が津波や高潮などの被害から守られています。当社は2007年にマングローブ植林の100年継続を目指すマングローブ植林100年宣言を公表し、2019年にそれを改定したマングローブ価値競争100年宣言を公表しました。この宣言は国連 SDGs の目標14達成に向けた海洋行動コミュニティにも登録し、植林 NGO などの皆様と共にマングローブを基盤とした解決策の提供を通じて価値競争を推進しています。SDG14 を達成するためにあらゆるステークホルダーが目指す姿を共有し、地域や時間軸の違いを超え、取り組みのベクトルの向きを揃える必要があります。SDGs の誰一人取り残さないという考え方はそのための大きな道しるべであり、IUCN の NBS スタンダードや UNEP-FI の持続可能なブルーエコノミーの手法や原則も参考になります。当社がグリーンギフトプロジェクトとマングローブ植林事業はグリーン×ブルーの価値競争により SDG 14の達成に貢献する取り組みです。当社はこの取り組みを100年継続し、グローバルな社会課題の解決と成長の好循環を続けることで、より良い社会を未来世代につなげていく責任を果たしてまいります。最後にマングローブの動画をご紹介いたしますのでご覧ください。
私たちはこれまでの経験を生かし、マングローブ植林がさまざまな課題の解決に貢献することをしっかりと理解し、多くの皆様に伝えます。そしてサステナブルな人、地球、社会の未来のために、マングローブ植林を地球の未来にかける保険と位置づけ、皆様と共に価値を創出し、100年間人、地球、社会のお役に立ち続けることを目指していきます。
Let's move on to the panel discussion. I'm happy to have such a level of expertise from the environmental as well as the financial angle today. Could I start with you, Lucy, and ask, why is this topic important for financial institutions to take into account?
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, it's a really important question, and of course you've touched on a lot of those key points in your introduction. But I think it's fair to say that reversing the decline of ocean health and recovering our ocean assets and natural capital is one of the most pressing challenges of our time. The ocean is quite simply vital to humanity and to the societies that depend on it, and the businesses that depend on it, as well as the financial institutions who are invested in those businesses. You mentioned that it's equivalent to the 7th largest economy in the world. And just to add to that, it is worth around $24 trillion in total assets, and estimated from a WWF report in 2015, producing benefits of around $2.5 trillion every year. So economically speaking, it's absolutely vital, as well as its co-benefits, regulating climate, pretty big one, feeding the world's populations, producing half the oxygen we breathe, for example, and supporting many millions, if not billions, of livelihoods all around the world. In the Coral Triangle, which is in Asia, where we are today, virtually speaking, the ocean is fundamental, and the blue natural capital that supports the economies of many of the Southeast Asian nations, for example, is really important. And to give you a few examples of that, I think 76% of the world's corals reside in the Coral Triangle, for example, and 37% of the global reef fish species are in the Coral Triangle. 6 out of the 7 turtle species are based in the Coral Triangle, and many more statistics like that. Very importantly, linking that to people, 130 million people approximately depend on health and the biodiversity and the benefits, ecosystem services that result from that in the Asia region. So essentially, Dennis, all of that is fundamental to our economies and our health. But unfortunately, all the indicators are trending in the wrong direction. Recent reports point to decline in a number of areas. For example, we've already lost half the world's coral reefs, for example, and the implications for that in terms of food security and livelihoods are quite stark. Fish stocks are in decline, and nearly 2/3 are either fish at their maximum or over their maximum limit, for example. So the importance for investors is that these are material risks to the businesses that they support and that they finance. Without coming up with ways to reverse those trends, and financial institutions have a vital role to play in that, to support through engagement with companies, for example, through understanding the risks that they potentially face, through setting expectations, for example, they are really able to support that transition. And I think we can't state clearly enough how important that is, not just from a environmental and social imperative, but really from a financial one as well.
Thanks very much, Lucy, for laying that out so neatly. I'd like to move on to Melissa and ask a similar question that kind of leads on from that. And Lucy talked about risks and materiality, but for Asian Development Bank, what is the business case for a sustainable blue economy for your organization?
Thanks, Dennis, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's such an important topic. To answer your question, I might start a little bit with the big picture and then drill down. Globally, we know that investing 2 to 4 trillion across sustainable ocean sectors will generate a net benefit of 8 to 23 trillion in the next 30 years. And for the Asia Pacific region, blue economy sectors such as tourism, fisheries, aquaculture, they're major contributors to the region's economy. But these sectors, as the previous speaker Lucy has mentioned as well, they're at risk due to unsustainable practices. This year, the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report identified biodiversity loss and human environmental damage as 2 of the biggest risks to the global economy. And for example, in fishing, the cost of overfishing has reduced the net benefit of global fisheries by 83 billion. 2/3 of that loss is in Asia. So if we don't invest in businesses that sustain the ocean, we're putting the entire economy at risk. The second reason, I guess, the business case for the ADB is that supporting the blue economy is about getting ahead of this tidal wave of market pressure that's coming. At ADB, we are under increasing pressure from our investors, clients, and partners to disclose climate and nature-related risks. Credit agencies are mainstreaming sustainability assessments. There's global accounting standards that are being updated to ensure inclusion of sustainability risks. And there's international agreements being forged to remove harmful subsidies. And frankly, change is coming. And as financial institutions, we need to get ahead of the curve to better understand and mitigate nature-related risks. Third, the financial sector is seeing this unprecedented demand for sustainable investments, particularly in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that the global green economy is worth 8 trillion, but the new frontier is the blue economy, and it too is booming. ADB is surveying emerging blue economy segments, and we're finding many new investment opportunities. Take clean energy, for example. The terrestrial green energy market is expanding, but it's limited by available land. The oceans, however, can provide almost limitless supplies of renewable energy. Offshore wind alone could generate 23 times more power than present total global electricity consumption. And there's numerous examples of emerging tech investments. ADB is working with the European Space Agency to deliver high-tech fisheries enforcement products for the island nation of Kiribati. But lastly, for the ADB, investing in the blue economy is not just about these shiny new investments, but the blue economy is ADB core business. ADB is committed to sustainable development and eradicating extreme poverty. And supporting ocean health is fundamental to achieving those objectives. Many traditional sectors for ADB, such as sanitation, wastewater, flood risk management, these sectors have massive benefits for ocean health and sustainable livelihoods. And for these more traditional segments, what we're finding is that nature-based solutions are the cost-effective investment choice. So for example, coastal ecosystems provide protection from waves and storms. But the kicker is this: restoring coastal ecosystems is 2 to 5 times cheaper than engineering solutions. So because this business case for sustainable blue economies is so strong and healthy oceans are so critical to the prosperity of our region, in 2019, ADB launched our Action Plan for Healthy Oceans and Sustainable Blue Economies. And we're committed to scale up blue economy investments to $5 billion by 2024. And we're actively seeking partners to help us to meet this ambitious target. Thanks, Dennis.
Thanks. Certainly a lot of arguments for getting involved in this topic, in this field. Francis, is that similar for China Industrial Bank? What is your business case for the sustainable blue economy and to be involved in this area?
Okay, thanks, Dennis. So our case comparing to like more policy banks like ADB or like NGOs such as WNEP is kind of like I could say kind of different because we're more of like apart from private sector. So for us, the sustainable business economy, I would say I can probably talk about it. I divide it into two sectors. One is about the new business opportunity, and another one is basically how to manage the I can say environmental climate risk with the guidelines which with the UNEP just provided. So I talk about the business opportunities because we know the ocean economy is kind of like a new area. The ocean's blue and it is actually a blue market. For example, I'll take probably the Chinese offshore like wind power sector, for example, because if I remember correctly, like 50% of the population are concentrated around the area which is close to the coastline, no longer about like 200 kilometers. So this is where 50% of the population is concentrated. This is where most of the industries, factories, and also the electricity usage from. However, the land wind power is kind of like limited because of the overpopulation and because of so many reasons. The wind power land wind power in China mostly concentrated in the west area where basically there's no man's land. So it's very hard to transfer the electricity power from there. So what we can do is just we look to the sea because actually the wind power coastline in China Sea is very rich actually comparing to some other wind farms in the rest of the world. However, because of the technology issue and because of the cost issue, this sector is, I would say, very underdeveloped. So we see this is actually this is like a blue water market. So to focus on the ocean economy is a way actually to find new business opportunities. And the second one is about the risk management because we're all familiar with the climate risk, their physical risk, the transition risk. But I'll provide you with a more solid example because in the city of China, Shenzhen, if you know, the legislators there just passed a law which officially makes lenders' liability a legal liability because if they should be held accountable for the projects they lend money to if the project do any damage to the environment. This is so far I know the first time that China officially make a law about that. So for financial institutions, it's always a good way to think ahead of it. We should not just wait till there's something bad happens where there's a fine comes out until we realize there's such a risk. So this is actually from the financial part. Another part is from the reputational one because nowadays with the internet, when everyone knows if you finance like a project which damage to the wetland, everybody will know, and this is a serious reputational risk. So this is very brief answer probably to this question, and if you have more time, I can talk about the case in more detail. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Francis. I'm very happy that you mentioned offshore wind as a particular sector. Of course, that's one of the topics that we covered in the blue finance guidance that I mentioned during my introduction. So actually, that leads me back to Lucy, who was directly involved in the development of this guidance. And can you tell us a bit more about what this guidance is and how financial institutions can practically use it?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dennis, for the opportunity. And I think all the speakers thus far have touched on the importance of both the risks and the opportunities of the blue economy and the transition to the sustainable blue economy. and the importance of understanding the risks that actually are being faced at economy-wide level, but also sector level, and then down to business activity level. And that really actually is a great segue into the guidance and the rationale for UNEP FI and WWF supporting that process to develop this guidance. The idea was really to provide practical sector-specific information for banks, investors, and insurers, as well as other types of financial institutions, and indeed beyond that to other stakeholder groups as well. It covers 5 blue economy sectors that we know are heavily dependent on or have an impact on the ocean, and that have a in some cases very clear transition pathway. Those sectors are, as Dennis mentioned, marine renewable energy, marine and coastal tourism, the seafood sector, both wild capture and aquaculture is in one, as it were, and shipping and port development. So those are the sort of the key areas that it covers. And really the idea is to take the principles, the sustainable blue economy finance principles, and understand or support rather financial institutions to understand how that they can practically use those at implementation level. And we know that this is important because actually at the beginning of the process, working with UNEP FI, there was a survey done to which over 80 financial institutions responded, really indicating that there is a quite broad and surging interest in understanding how to match capital with ocean health, which was really very encouraging to hear. But at the same time, hearing that really the financial sector is at the very beginning of that journey of really understanding what that means. So the guidance felt very timely. And just to give you a little understanding, and of course, Dennis mentioned you can download it. It is essentially 2 components to it. So there's a report, if you like, a narrative component, which is a sector by sector analysis of the impacts from each sector, really explaining clearly and concisely how specific activities have the potential to contribute to environmental and social impacts, and then why those impacts not only detrimental to the environment and to society, but also to the businesses that depend on them. And then the second component is a downloadable appendix, which is the actual guidance, where it goes very much into detail about what the mitigation strategies are that businesses can take in order to minimize or mitigate those risks and maximize opportunities. So there are 3 categories that are flagged within this, which Dennis mentioned, and I'll just reiterate. So the traffic light system, if you like, per sector and per activity within each sector is really to reflect the action that financial institutions can take as a result of understanding whether or not a particular risk is in place. And the avoid category, the red category, is for the most serious risks, where the recommendation is really to avoid financing or do not finance activities that have those risks associated with them, such as illegality, for example. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there is the seek out category, which is really the opportunity side. So what types of core business activities and business models should we be looking for as a really good investment that not only is future-proofed with respect to risk management, but also understanding where each sector is going and what is required to actually solve some of these problems. And in the middle, which is the broadest category, really is what we've called challenge, and that's really to support financial institutions to understand how they should be engaging clients and or portfolio companies, for example, to set out expectations of how they would like businesses to manage certain risks and what types of tools and resources should they be implementing. And I think the things that we see as being the guidance being very useful for with respect to financial institutions, maybe 3 key things, but there are potentially others. There will be others. The first is really to sort of boost due diligence. So to support the existing information there is, ESG analysis around some of these sectors and businesses. We all know they don't necessarily go into as much detail as they could, and the ocean is rather an unexplored area in the ESG analysis world at the moment. So just trying to really boost that information for the financial sector. Secondly is really engagement and understanding how to have conversations with clients and with companies. And then the third is product development, how to really create thematic bonds or funds, sustainability linked loans, for example, with credible KPIs that are able to reflect, the best available science.
Thanks very much, Lucy. And of course, we're very lucky today to have 2 experts from the field, so to speak, with us today. So Melissa, how is ADB implementing the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles and also using the guidance to help in that?
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. ADB is really proud to be a signatory of the principles, and we're really taking them to heart and working hard to systematically integrate the principles into our investment decisions. The guidance that Lucy was just talking about has been quite recently introduced, and previous to that, we've been working on the overarching 14 principles and how to apply those. So I might speak a little bit about what we've been doing in that area first. The first and second principles are about being protective of marine ecosystems and compliant with international frameworks. And ADB has a really strong safeguard system which screens out, does negative screening on projects which could harm the environment. And we also ensure that all ADB investments align with the joint MDB framework on climate finance. So all investments are climate aware and supportive of the transition to renewable energy. Another one that's really important to ADB is number 5 on inclusivity. We're partnering really closely with developing member countries and many island and coastal communities to ensure that all of our blue economy investments are supportive of vulnerable communities and particularly providing jobs and economic empowerment for women. Principles 11 and 12 are about making diversified and solution-driven investments. And ADB has 3 flagship ocean programs, which I think really articulate this. The first is around coastal resilience and nature-based solutions, where we're working directly with vulnerable coastal communities to use integrated gray-green solutions. Our second flagship is focused on reducing marine plastic pollution. And this is both through integrated solid waste management, but also innovative circular economy approaches by both SMEs and global firms. And our third flagship is on ocean finance and the blue economy, in which we're seeking out innovative finance mechanisms, structures, and investments to scale up blue economies in the region. But the last principle that I really want to highlight is number 7 on transparency. So this is really important to us. And in order to be fully transparent about ADB's blue economy investments, we're really pleased to share that we've created an ocean finance framework. The ADB Ocean Finance Framework, it aligns with the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles, but it provides a more granular level of detail to the types of projects that ADB will fund and those that we will account towards our $5 billion commitment. It defines a typology of ocean investments and provides eligibility criteria for each type of an investment. We believe we're the first bank to explicitly create such a framework. And what we've learned through this process is that there's many economic segments which benefit the ocean, and we need science-based and pragmatic thresholds to define what is and what's not a blue economy investment. And we're also building on this framework to develop a new green and blue bond framework. paving the way for the issuance of blue bonds, the first of which is expected in the third quarter of 2021, with an issuance of up to 500 million. So our next step will be piloting the guidance, the recently released guidance, and we're really looking forward to working closely with other financial institutions to test if and how these guidelines can be applied in our investment decision-making processes and how they might interact with our ocean finance framework. Thanks.
That's very exciting to hear, Melissa. Thanks for highlighting that. And of course, we are now in the phase of really wanting to field test the guidance recommendations across financial institutions. And Francis, you at China Industrial Bank, you're one of the first organizations from China to join the initiative at UNEP. And may I ask why you joined, and also how the guidance that was just published might help you implement the principles?
Hey, thanks, Dennis. So I would say probably the reasons for us to joining the initiative is like because of two reasons. First one is about I would believe it provides like a common ground or topics for people to communicate or for people to compare between different projects because actually I can tell you right now we are actually developing we would say in-house ESG standards for our group. So one thing we find is really hard is to make details about the factors that we should focus on different sectors or different industries, because for different industry you will definitely different KPIs to measure them. And actually for blue economy, the KPI around this sector I would say is sometimes underdeveloped or require more developed compared to some other more popular industries. So by just signing this, we find the guidelines is really helpful for us to start with, to figure out which factors we should start with, so that everybody can stay on the same page. So the case that when 100 people comes out with 100 different standards for that to make sure that won't happen. And also for another reason is because we find it useful to use it internally. This is really related to our business strategy, because one of our key business strategies for us is to focus on the bankable infrastructures in China. So because like I would say 20 years before, half of the Chinese major cities, they don't just lake out enough capacity to treat the urban wastewater. So the wastewater will just be pumped out directly into rivers or seas, causing pollution and all sort of other problems. So these infrastructures are what China has been needed for, I would say, the past 20 years. So that has been always our key business strategy. So when I say bankable, I mean the infrastructure that has its own cash flow or with some reasonable subsidies they can run on themselves. So water-related infrastructure is really fit in this topic, because like wastewater treatment facilities, they could charge the users, and they charge the users probably that will comes up like 70% of their income, with the rest of the 30% of the income from government subsidies will work perfectly. So these business has always been our key assets. So we need to understand for the past 20 years we have been funding so many projects. What have they really done to the environment, to the society, to the environment, to the economy? So the guidelines is actually providing us a way to help us to better understand our portfolio both in terms of business strategy and in terms of the risk management. So I would take an example, because like last year we issued the first blue bond issued by private sector. So that blue bond consists of, I remember, is 13 projects. I say 2 from the offshore wind power, and the rest they're all from the water infrastructure, either pipelines or the wastewater treatment facilities around just close to the Chinese coastline. So the guidelines provides a way for us to take better look into these projects, and also provide a way for us to communicate with our investors. Say, you invested in our blue bond. So what these projects have done to the environment. So the investors have a better idea about that.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Thanks for highlighting that. May I ask you a follow-on question as well? Of course, we all know, we have all experienced the blue economy really raising up the agenda and there being more and more interest from financial institutions in this topic, but it's certainly not mainstream yet. So what do you think are the current barriers for your peers to enter or take the first steps in this area?
I'll say some barriers probably because of still a lack of the industrial standards or issues like that. I'll take probably the aquaculture or fishery, for example, because so far as I know in China, the fishery industry they still don't have label or something to label for is sustainable fishery or something like that. There's indeed there'll be green food, for example, but that's for the consumers. That's for the consumer to understand these foods, the processing process. They don't use antibiotics, etc. However, what these industry has done to the environment is still lack of regulatory or law enforcement. So for end of consumers, they really don't have they don't have a way to understand how the environmental impacts of these products are. And for us, like financial institutions, we definitely don't have the expertise or the time to look at each project, to look at each fish farms and say how they're performing well. So these labeling, or I would say, and what we can expect, the most ideal one is more international recognized labeling. However, that still don't exist yet because the economic development and also the environmental standards in different countries that still remains different. So that's one barrier I would definitely has to come up with. And probably the second barrier is basically how to connect the environmental benefits with the economic benefits. So one way to connect each other is through the risk management process, because the financial for us we would try to understand if we invest in for example the residential mortgage in a coastline, what will be the risk if that house is being flooded or being hit by a typhoon. However, the risk management is still indirectly related to the private sector's profitability. So you understand the risk, but you still don't understand. I have been asked by lots of investors, I invest in your green bond. What's going to be my economic benefit from it? So we need to educate them not only from the investment return the return of the investment, but say, hey, our green bond does reduce the risk of your investment. But however, if you ask me, what will be the does it have a higher coupon rate? Probably because there's different studies about that, but people still don't have different opinions. So I would say this is another barrier. It not only exists in the blue economy but also in the entire sustainable economy part. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Francis. Yeah, I certainly agree. Education and regulation are two big ones, I think. Melissa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I'd absolutely echo Francis. We're finding several challenges around this idea of definitions and thresholds. Now we've got some new guidance in 5 sectors, but for example, land-based pollution, we're struggling with it. We understand the science. We know that we need to work upstream in rivers in order to protect ocean ecosystems, but how far upstream? and under what, conditions would we consider a project to be blue. So there's still a lot of work to be done in that space. And this lack of universal indicators, it's really challenging. In climate finance, it's easy to measure and report across institutions. You can look at tons of carbon. We have nothing like that in the blue economy. So being able to have standardized reporting and, as Francis was saying, being able to clearly and simply articulate to investors what they're buying and the impact that we're creating, it's really difficult at this stage. But one more quick challenge I'd bring up. We're still seeing a big mismatch between available capital and available project pipelines. And I think MDBs have a big role to play in this, to de-risk projects and bring in the private sector and catalyze. But we've got a long way to go in order to match up the projects that are coming to us as a bank and the type of capital that we have available with where we want to go in really driving forward the blue economy.
Thanks very much, Melissa. I think that leads us perfectly to a close, unfortunately, of the session. I would like to ask each of you to give a very brief final message, and to make it a bit hopeful, I would like to ask you, if you had one wish, what would you like your peers or governments to do in order to advance the sustainable economy? Maybe we can ask with Lucy, then Melissa, and then Francis. Over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Dennis, and I think all the points that the other panelists just made are really critical takeaways in and of themselves. But I think my wish, and I think it is coming together, is for financial institutions to really start acting in their own enlightened self-interest in the context of setting expectations at a higher level than we've seen in the past with respect to ocean-dependent sectors and the blue economy. Really starting to articulate, working with peers, working with government, or advocating to governments, let's say, but working with the science community, the NGO community, to really start to concretely set the bar and expectations around specific aspects of sectors as to what they will or won't finance, and what they expect the transition pathway to be if they do go ahead with financing. So I think that we are seeing that start to happen, but that would be my my desire would be to start accelerating that work.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Melissa, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I like the optimistic end to the panel. It's good. I think my wish is that all financial institutions would really take stock of how their investments are impacting the ocean for good and bad, and that we need to get past this idea of these niche and small investments for the ocean, but really look at all of our traditional sectors and how their impacts in the ocean and how we can improve those investments. And there are economically viable solutions to make our pipelines more blue. So, and then after looking inward and understanding better what the impacts are and how we can make things more blue, then going back outward and working together collectively as a community of financial institutions to build that market and grow it together, because we need to ensure that we've got healthy and resilient oceans for the future.
Thanks very much, Melissa. Francis, your last words. You have 1 minute left.
Probably I'll say one of the most wishes I have is for financial regulators. Probably they can think about providing some more incentive policies to the blue economy and also to the entire sustainable finance as well. Because just take the capital adequacy ratio, or this ratio, for example, even just 10 basis points of preference towards the more sustainable financing could unleash, like, I would say, trillions of dollars into the whole world economy. So that's actually a really powerful weapon for the regulators, and provide incentives so that we no longer works on just classify what we have done, but we have more incentives to put more resources into the sustainable finance from we will say traditional brown assets.
Super, thanks. And I love these very positive calls to action at the end. With that, I really would like to thank our speakers and anyone tuning in today. I do want to finish by highlighting that financial institutions can act as an enabler of change by using their expertise in finding opportunities and understanding of risk. We do have a symbiotic relationship with the ocean, and to solve the climate, biodiversity, and pollution crises, a healthy and prosperous ocean is our main ally. So echoing our excellent panelists today, I encourage any financial institutions in the audience today to evaluate their impact on the marine environment and to urgently show leadership on this topic of the sustainable blue economy. If you do want to learn more, join the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative and don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks very much.